53. The Olive Trees, 1889. When Van Gogh worked beyond the hospital at St. Remy. In early summer 1889, he was delighted by the olive trees seen against the Alp hills. They became a focus in his aim to capture his impressions of Provence, a series of pictures through which he would transform reality into an expressive ideal. The rhythmic stylization of the earth, trees and mountains, and the form of a massive cloud above were probably all painted in the studio. Oil on canvas. The Museum of Modern Art, New York. Mrs. John Hay Whitney bequest, 1998. 54. The Olive Trees, 1889. Van Gogh made this drawing after the painting alongside 53, and chose to push its abstract, decorative qualities to even greater heights. The virtuosity of his cursive and calligraphic use of the quill and reed pen puts this work on a par with the Montmajor drawings of the previous summer. Theo Van Gogh, however, was surprised at this direction in his brother's work and tried to discourage its further pursuit. Pencil, quill, and reed pen and brown ink on wove paper. Promised gift of Joe Carroll and Ronald S. Lauder to the Museum of Modern Art, New York. 55. Mountains at St. Remy, 1889. Taking an actual view as a starting point, but choosing not to reproduce it faithfully. Van Gogh painted this highly abstracted landscape using mobile, heavy outlines that he happily acknowledged had little to do with nature. In a further remove from observation, he invented the foreground hut and sunflowers, inspired by a scene in Le Sens de la Vie, The Meaning of Life, an 1889 novel by Edouard Rod, 1857-1910. Oil on canvas. Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, New York. Thanhauser Collection. Gift, Justin K. Thanhauser, 1956. Olive Trees, 1889. Looking down onto the earth and shadows cast by a grove of olives. Van Gogh began this picture working outdoors in June 1889, but in September, he reworked and changed it in the studio to intensify the work's highly textured surface. Although the yellows, pinks, and reds, which heighten the color contrasts throughout, have since degraded and almost disappeared, the picture remains remarkably expressive. Oil on canvas. The Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, Kansas City, Missouri. Purchase. William Rockhill Nelson Trust, 32-2. 57. Olive Trees, 1889. The prominent placement of an intensely yellow sun recalls Van Gogh's painting of The Sower, 23, of the year before, in which the disk of the sun became a natural halo for the figure. Here the disk hovers above a grove of highly stylized olive trees. At the time, Van Gogh wanted to prove to Gauguin and Bernard that an expressive work of art could be made without quoting directly from the Bible. Oil on canvas. Lent by the Minneapolis Institute of Art, Minneapolis. The William Hood Dunwoody Fund. 58. Olive Grove, St. Remy, 1889. Recent technical analysis has suggested that Van Gogh painted this olive grove largely outdoors as natural materials have been found in its paint layers. It is exceptionally well preserved in terms of its color. In other works, such as Olive Grove with 2 olive pickers, 59, hanging alongside, Van Gogh experimented with paints that were new on the market and which have since faded. For this luminous picture, he used more stable pigments. Oil on canvas. Gothenburg Museum of Art. 59. Olive Grove with 2 olive pickers, 1889. In the studio, Van Gogh repeated the composition of Olive Grove, St. Remy, 58, to which he added imagined figures, a smiling woman in the foreground and a man in blue. Their presence adds to what was already a highly composed and stylized depiction of a grove beneath, a sky flecked with wisps of red and blue clouds, all painted using drifts of brushstrokes. Oil on canvas. Kröller-Müller Museum, Otterlo, the Netherlands. 60. Tree Trunks in the Grass, 1890. Applying paint in calligraphic strokes reminiscent of his reed pen drawings, Van Gogh revels in the textures and colors of this view of flowering weeds growing among the trees in the garden at St. Remy, in contrast to the sadness and suffering he aimed to convey in depictions of the hospital grounds the previous autumn. His paintings of the garden in spring 1890 suggest joy and hope. Oil on canvas. Kröller-Müller Museum, Otterlo, the Netherlands. 61. Long Grass with Butterflies, 1890. By the spring of 1890, Van Gogh was acting on plans to leave the south of France and return north. He was, however, captivated yet again by signs of burgeoning life, such as butterflies among the grass and details of the undergrowth he found in the garden at Saint Remy. Oil on canvas. The national